Well, good
Good
morning,
morning.
everyone. It's 10 a.m. We're going to get started. I am going to record this webinar so that people who aren't in attendance today and wish to learn later will have that available. I think it'll be available for about a month, and then the recording gets deleted. So we'll get started. I am excited to kick off my summer webinar series with you all with this topic of artificial intelligence in the English language arts classroom. Uh, and I think I'm ready to just get started. One thing that we do for all of our professional learning in our office here at the State Department of Ed and our Office of Standards and Learning is we take attendance now just to kind of know who all is here. So in the chat, there's a bit.ly link. If you would quickly uh, fill that out for me, that'd be great. We're going to do one other bit.ly link at the end for an evaluation, which will be anonymous, but this attendance form, you will indicate uh, some information like which district you're at and things of that nature. But that helps our office know which regions of the state we are reaching. All right, I'm going to let you multitask and I'll get through some of my housekeeping things. For instance, I'm Jason Stevenson. I'm the program manager of secondary education in the Office of Standards and Learning here at the OSDE. Feel free to reach out to me down the line through email or phone call. I'm here for you all Monday through Friday, 7:30 to 4. I will be offering 3 other webinars this summer, one on grammar instruction, on strategies for sentence combining and imitation next week. The following week, we'll talk about morphology at the secondary level, prefixes, suffixes, and roots, how to best teach those, and also how not to teach them on July 22nd. Those are on Tuesday. And then on Monday, July 28th, if you teach or want to teach a creative writing elective, we'll have a session on how best to do that using some newly developed competencies in creative writing. So all of these you register for individually. If you need the links for that, you let me know. But I think you probably know how to do it since you're already here on this one. Later this fall, I'll be leading a 3-hour in-person workshop around the state. You see the dates and locations listed there. And then I normally do a virtual version as well. The registration for all of these is forthcoming, but it should be available in my August newsletter, which is probably how you found out about this webinar. But the topic will be a deeper dive into today's topic. So we'll spend 3 hours on generative artificial intelligence and become even more familiar with this topic. So you know why you're here. We're going to learn a little bit about ChatGPT today, some of the promises and perils of AI, some of the ethical implications, guardrails that are needed, and then actually applying AI in an English language arts setting and seeing what that could look like. So our plan today is pretty straightforward. We want to learn what Gen AI is and how it works. We want to explore some Gen AI documents, such as a syllabus statement, a student disclosure statement, and an assignment use scale. And then we're going to see Gen AI in action and brainstorm some possibilities for its use in our own particular settings, be they middle school or high school. So here's a little funny that I saw online recently where the Grammarly add-on, which is an AI tool, suggested to someone that the phrase truly wasn't was incorrect. And it popped up to the human writer, don't you want to change that to the correct word order of was trulyant? And so this is just an example of humans actually are the ones who write, and machines can suggest or predict. Machines compute, but they sometimes do get it wrong. And in this age of AI becoming more and more common in our lives, we need some quick definitions here of what that is. So AI, or artificial intelligence, is a machine learning system that predicts outcomes based on statistical models derived from data sets. So it is something that can be trained with data and it can make predictions. And one example of AI in the real world for this is just Siri. And Siri can get some things right, but you probably had instances where it gets it wrong. Within AI, there's a subset of generative artificial intelligence, or abbreviated to Gen AI. And this is a type of AI that produces synthetic text, images, music, and videos in response to human created prompts. So there's a human prompt, the machine uses all of its data, and it creates an output. Midjourney is an example of image creation, and then Suno is a website that will create music and songs simply by entering a prompt. I have had fun with Suno this summer, giving it a prompt, saying what I want the topic of the song to be, the style of the song, whether it's a 90s pop ballad or country music, if I want it to have a male or a female vocalist, and then it will generate not only the lyrics, verses, and chorus, but it will actually, sing it to you. You only get 10 free credits a day, and then you have to wait your turn to play around with it the next day. But I will be sharing the slideshow with you all at the end of our webinar. So I will absolutely share this with you. And then within Gen AI, there's an even more specific type of generative AI called a large language model. This gets abbreviated to LLM. And one example of this is ChatGPT. So it is trained on vast bodies of pre-existing text, and by using statistics and probability, so some computer science, it can then use all that data and all that pre-generated text that was made by humans to then produce text that is similar to a text composed by a human. There are lots of other Gen AI or LLMs out there, but it's important to remember that these do not work like magic. They are based on this machine data learning. So some of the Gen AI tools that are out there, some of these will create synthetic text, some will create synthetic images, are Google Gemini, Claude, which has an 18 and up policy. So if you're wanting to try any of these with your students, be aware of that limitation with Claude. Microsoft has Copilot, then there's also Perplexity and Poe. And the links to all of these are right there. And we'll look at some examples of some of them in use later. And we can't really turn and talk easily in a webinar. So I'm going to ask for one or two volunteers to share an answer to one of these 4 questions. Have you already used Gen AI in your classroom? Or are your students using Gen AI? Or do you already have a policy about Gen AI? Or does your school or district already have a policy about Gen AI, or specifically these large language models? And Holly's got her virtual hand raised, so that makes it easy. Holly, kick us off.
All right, the answer to the top 3 are definitely yes. I actually started my year last year addressing this right off the bat because I didn't want to deal with any ridiculousness that they were not walking to, knowingly. So we talked about the perils of AI. We had them also use Suno to create a grammar song so that they could, on the day that we covered that item of grammar, they could have that playing in the background or for part of our activity. So we use it for some fun stuff. And then we also talked about how we weren't going to use it and how we were going to use it in the English classroom. I introduced that acceptable use scale. And then when I had assignments that were assigned, we had, this is a 0 AI, or this is a, whatever level it was.
Okay.
And then of course, the policy of if you use it on an assignment that's not specifically given an AI use level of, above 0, or if you use it outside of those parameters or without, documenting it accordingly, it's an automatic 0. I won't even keep reading it. And we had a couple students do that. So,
Have had to live and learn.
Yeah, they did.
Thank you for sharing that, Holly. I see that Marie in the chat said No experience with AI, and that's okay. For these future discussions, you all feel free to put your answers in the chat box as well, but people can also come off mute and share. We have time for one more person to share an answer to one of these questions if you'd like to. Would anyone like to? Piggyback on what Holly said, Kenzie Pratt, go for it.
Hi, good morning. Um, let's see if I can get hello. So last year I did a unit on AI and I had students who were using more AI than I wanted to for their informational essay. And so instead of me, and I had already talked about acceptable use policy and everything, but I felt like we really needed to deep dive into this. So I think we did 11 nonfiction text, including like a Harvard EdCast transcript about the critical thinking and development in children, and social etiquette, and how things like Alexa and Siri are affecting just even like social etiquette at young ages. And so it was really pretty cool to have my students look at all these nonfiction texts, and then I paired it with Ray Bradbury's The Veldt, which is kind of a AI nursery room, and kind of talk about the dangers of becoming reliant on this kind of technology. And then we did a kind of Socratic seminar where we looked at different essential questions as concerned with AI, and just how we're using it and what we see the future of AI looking like. And then for their argumentative essay, I actually had them come in and write it in class, timed, but they had already had all of this information to use. And then they wrote their argumentative essays on whether or not they felt like AI was mostly a danger to society or helpful. And so that was the best argumentative essays that I have had in my teaching career. And I really felt like it was just kind of the thoroughness of exploring this in fiction and nonfiction. And then the conversations, but also it's just such a relevant topic. So I feel like they really got a lot out of it. And I've also used like Canva AI to create like digital book talk album covers and different things. So I'm excited to be here, but definitely a lot of cool ideas and a lot of cool things we can do. I'm so glad to hear somebody used the grammar song. So I was really wanting to play around with that this year. So
It sounds like we've got some early adopters in our midst, so I will try to be a resource for you all, but please remember Kenzie Pratt and Holly Kubiak are also some AI users among us, so we can learn from each other. All right, we're going to move right along here. Large language models, or LLMs, they do benefit all student writers, but especially those who have disabilities, who have knowledge gaps, who speak a language other than English, who struggle with writing anxiety, who maybe just need a thought partner. So it's something to keep in mind, but there are potential risks with LLMs, and we're just going to dip in just for a little bit on these. One possibility is that there could be a spread of misinformation. And the term that's commonly used in circles with AI is hallucinations, because sometimes a large language model will create something that is false because it was trained on a data set and it's trying to answer a prompt. And sometimes it will just get it wrong. Sometimes it's maybe a half truth, sometimes it's just totally wrong. And so we need to make sure our students know that if they're using an LLM for research or other purposes, that they need to cross-reference and check their not only check the information against what they know themselves, but also confirm it with another source that's not a large language model. So there is a risk for spread of misinformation. Also, there can be biased outputs sometimes. The reason that happens is that humans are biased, whether we know it or not. Sometimes we are raised in such a way that we might have a bias on something that we have no way of knowing until later in life. And sometimes we don't realize we're biased about something, but it comes out through our writing. And so when a large language model is trained on lots and lots of human writing, and some of those humans have biases, the output could also be biased. This may even show up as indicating that one profession would be aligned to only one particular gender instead of both. So referring to doctors as male and nurses as female, when we know that that's not always the case in our world. So students also need to be aware that there might be some biased outputs in an LLM. There are also privacy issues because students sometimes, you know, the students always need to be protected with their privacy. And so if they're sharing information that is personal, such as their name, such as where they live, who their best friend is, what their dad does, what companies he's at, all of that, there can be privacy issues regarding that. And so students need to be careful what they choose to share. And we also, as teachers, need to be aware what sort of information is this website taking or using from our students, and are they protected? Then there's the issue of copyright violations. Going around on social media in the past couple years, I have seen multiple times young adult authors and just authors in general saying there has been a leak that my writing, my novels, my poems, my whatever they happen to have written was used to train one of these data sets, and they did not give permission. But these tech companies somehow got their hands on their manuscripts and fed them through their LLM to help train it to write better and to write like a human. But those authors would have never consented to that had they been asked, and they weren't. So that's just something to be aware of, that some of these LLMs have violated copyright. And then there are environmental costs to AI. The computing that's required to produce all of this human text is astronomically large. And because there are so many computers and the microchips, this and that, and the wiring and whatever, it takes a lot of energy to cool those buildings that house this machinery and technology. And so there's an environmental trade-off to be aware of. And I do use AI in my work sometimes, totally admit it. And so each time I use it in the back of my mind, I'm like, okay, I hope it's worth it, Jason, that you're decided to use AI for this thing or that thing. Because all of that cooling and AC, and somehow it's also connected to water. I still don't fully understand the water usage connected to it, but there are environmental costs. So those are just risks to be aware of. Now I want to shift gears and talk about the intrinsic value of writing and having our students be the ones who do the bulk of the writing in our ELA courses, and not to rely on generative AI, to do the writing for them. The reason that we have our students write is it is a way for them to learn, to explore. It is a human right. It is a lifelong skill. They will be writing for the rest of their lives, and it's linked to literacy development. It's the flip side of reading, and it's a skill that cannot and should not be replaced by a machine. And it is a tough skill to teach, but it's worth teaching well. And so that is what we want to invest in our classes. But with the advent of ChatGPT and all of these other large language models, organizations have responded on, like, what do we need to do? The college or the Conference on College Composition and Communication, CCCC, and the Modern Language Association, MLA, they have released 3 different white papers on generative AI at the college level the past couple years. And in their April 2024 paper, they said this: writing gives students intellectual and creative opportunities to develop and play while preparing them for careers that one day, if not already, may require skill with artificial intelligence. So it's not really an either or situation, but a both and, that students need to know how to write, how to be creative with their writing. And then there's also this element of knowing how to use AI effectively, knowing when to use it and how to use it. And then from Writing for All, which is a lovely white paper from NWEA, which you may be familiar with their assessment suite, but they have a document called Stanzas on Writing. And they say this: writers now have many more decisions to consider when addressing a rhetorical situation than they did prior to the proliferation of digital tools and access to a varied, networked audience. So I think back to the tools I had when I was in school. I used index cards to organize my research paper on the Oregon Trail, because I had played the computer game and wanted to know what it was like in actual history. I didn't have all of these digital tools. We barely had the internet, and it screamed at us when we tried to log on, you know, dial-up days. So our students do have just so many tools at their disposal to help them. But here's something to keep in mind in our ELA classes. Writing is both a process and a product. Writing process is the movement between all of those stages of pre-writing, drafting, revising, editing, and publishing. And students are going to revisit those time and time again, spend more time in one stage than another, revisit some of those stages more than once in order to get to a finished product, be it an essay, a poem, a multimodal presentation. But if all we're assessing and all we care about is the finished product, that is a recipe for cheating, whether that's with AI or back when I was in the classroom in like 2015. I had a student once submit a paper and I thought, that is not this student's voice. I bet that's online. And all he'd done was copied a personal narrative from someone else and replaced the name of the city and his own name in the story. And that was all he'd done. But back then, I was not the teacher that I would later become, because what I did with writing was I mainly assigned it and I assessed it, but I never really taught it. And I feel like that is common in early teachers or teachers who were never, taught how to help students move through all those different stages of the writing process. So it is important for us now more than ever to make sure our assignments acknowledge the writing process and are not only focused on the final product, because then there's going to be a greater temptation to cheat, and it will be easier for students to cheat now with these AI tools at their disposal. So we should both teach and assess writing assignments in stages. Lower stakes, let's check on your thesis, or let's check on a body paragraph. Let's check on how you plan to organize your essay, and giving small grades for these different stages of the writing process. And then build in rounds of feedback from both you, but also their peers, and give students room for self-reflection as well. And then I would encourage you in this school year and from henceforth to encourage students to reflect on their writing process. And I don't just mean encourage, I guess. I would require them to include a writer's statement at the end of their final product that they do submit, saying how they wrote their piece or what they learned from the process of writing the piece. Where do they still want to grow as a writer? How did they strengthen as a writer over the course of this 6-week assignment that you built in stages of smaller check-ins and assessments along the way? So those are some things that can maybe guard us against receiving lots of writing that just got put through ChatGPT and any of these other large language models. Okay, so we're going to actually use the handout now that I mentioned earlier in the email from yesterday and at the start of this webinar. And we're going to look at some generative artificial intelligence literacies, so Gen AI literacies. These come from one of those white papers that I mentioned earlier. And they were initially created for college level students. But when I looked at them, I thought some of these could be taught at the high school level. Some of these could even be taught at the middle school level. And so on page 1 of your handout, you have a list of, I think it's 11 statements. And I'd like you to review those now and assign each one a grade band. M for middle school, H for high school, C for college. And then we'll do a bit of debriefing, and then I'll show you what my answer was, what my answers were, but I'm not the end all be all. Certainly interested in what you all think as well. And what you're basically doing here, if you're a middle school teacher and you mark some of these M, that means you could teach these literacies to your students in the upcoming school year. And if you're a high school teacher and mark some of these H, you could teach the H ones. And then if you mark any M, you could also teach those to your high school students. And then you're off the hook from teaching any of these literacies if you mark them as C. Those can wait till college. We're moving at lightning speed today. So what I'd like to do now is to have one person share one of your answers. Tell us which of the 11 literacies it is that you're talking about and which grade band you assigned it to and why. So for instance, you might say, number 7, evaluating output for bias, that you think that's a high school level literacy, and then give us a rationale. So let's hear from at least 2 of you. Just an answer for one of these that you've picked. Anyone want to share, willing to share? You can also put your answer in the chat. Okay, Elaine, thanks you. Thank you. Go ahead.
The first one I marked was access and understand policies and guidelines for using Gen AI, but set by a teacher or school. Obviously, middle school can understand that.
I agree. That seems a pretty straightforward thing, but it does mean a school or teacher needs to have that policy in place. And we're still playing catch up with that in certain districts or certain schools. So there you go. All right, thank you, Elaine. One other person willing to share which grade band you assigned to one of these literacies? Go for it, Erica. Thank you.
Well, I don't know if I'm overestimating students' abilities or not, but I put middle school on a lot of these.
Okay.
Like evaluate number 6, evaluate Gen AI output for accuracy and relevancy, because I just feel like you're already supposed to be learning about relevancy and you should be cross-referencing for accuracy even in middle school.
I think you're right on. And we have some standards that already talk about evaluating sources for relevancy or accuracy. And so why not apply that to AI output as well? So I'm going to go ahead and keep sharing my screen. Thank you, Erica, and show you these were some of the literacies I thought really would work well at the middle school level. And I don't know if I had the one that Elaine shared, but I can totally sympathize or understand why She picked number one as a middle school, and I do have the one Erica said is middle school on here as well. High school is where I had placed looking at the policies from a school or a teacher, looking for bias. And then the college level, I put the rhetorical situation and monitoring Gen AI compared to their own learning goals, being more self-reflective and all of those things. But these are all skills that students eventually will need to know and need to have no matter their stage in life. Okay, so now I want you to turn the page in your handout to page 2. Now I have a list of Gen AI literacies for teachers for you all. There are fewer, so instead of 11, there's only 8 because teachers are busy. We've already done a lot of learning ourselves. But what I'd like you to do is review these literacies for teachers, and I want you to select 4 that you'd like to focus on in the upcoming school year, 1 per 9 weeks. So you'll put your answers for as Q1, 2, 3, and 4 for quarter 1, quarter 2, and so on. And that can be sort of your Gen AI focus for the year. And these are especially for those of you who are just now dipping your toes into the waters of Gen AI. For you early adopters, Holly and Kenzie, I challenge you to pick one of the more advanced literacies from this list for your goals in the upcoming year. And take a minute or two to review this list and then pick out some goals for yourself. Some of these might make more sense than others, but number 7, respect the choice to opt out. That's talking about letting students decide if they don't want to use Gen AI, then you should respect that decision. And that can be connected to any of those perils that we talked about already. It might be a family decision, but we want to kind of avoid a blanket, everyone's using it, but we also want to avoid a blanket, everyone's not going to use it. I think there needs to be some choice in there for all students. Okay, we're going to move quickly here. So we're going to have 1 or 2 of you again, if you don't mind, share one of the goals that you picked for yourself for the upcoming year. In fact, why don't we just have everyone put their answer in the chat? But Holly, go ahead. We'll have 1 or 2 of you also share aloud. So which goal did you pick?
Well, I chose 4, 5, 6, and 8, but I want to start with number 8 because students don't often think about their online safety and privacy at all. And so I think it's a good foundational thing to start with before you even launch the year.
Great. I think that makes a whole lot of sense, and it's maybe something that even we as adults don't always consider our privacy or our settings. One of my colleagues here at the agency got a phone call on his personal cell phone this morning about a new policy here in Oklahoma about school lunches that you may have heard yesterday. But it was a phone call from someone that he had never shared his number with. He has no idea how they got his phone number. All right, Margaret, would you like to share one of your goals? Oh, you're muted though. You'll have to come off mute, Margaret. I'm not sure if I can unmute you. I can't unmute. So there's a little microphone button in the upper right corner, Margaret. If you'll click on that.
I got it.
Great.
I got it.
Go for
I
it.
think I got it.
You did. Okay, what's one of your goals?
Sorry about that. My goal is what I am doing currently. I have used AI before personally, and I don't pretend to be proficient at its personal use at this time. So what I'm doing now is seeking out professional development, and that is a reason why I am
here
on this
today?
very worthy workshop right now.
Okay, good. I'm glad I can help you reach that goal. Okay, and I see lots of other good answers here in the chat. So hold on to these, and those can kind of be a reminder for you this school year. So let's talk about the role of teachers, schools, and districts regarding AI. We'll move right along here. Here are two recent news article headlines, one from the Intelligencer, one from the New York Times. Everyone is cheating their way through college. ChatGPT has unraveled the entire academic project. And then we also have teachers worry about students using AI, but they love it for themselves. So we see this tension, or this it's good for you, but not for me, or vice versa, happening with how everyone's responding to the usage of AI. And I actually just read an article yesterday, so it's not even in the uh, slideshow yet, from the New Yorker's news issue called "The End of the Essay," and the byline or the subtitle is "What Comes After AI Has Destroyed College Writing." Very fascinating article, in which some undergrads who were in like English courses, they weren't English majors, they just had to take a comp course or an English course, used Chat GPT to write their essays, and they scored an A and a B, just using that large language model. So there is a lot of hand wringing. It does feel like the sky is falling a little bit, but we still want to be prepared for how to navigate this new scary world. So that's why you're here today. That's why I'm trying to be your guide through this new terrain. So some of the policy decisions that I read up on had this as a good reminder that we should always center the learning. Whatever the policy that's in place at the district level, the school level, or the classroom level, we need to make sure we are centering student learning. And we can base that on our Oklahoma academic standards for English language arts. We could also base it on those Gen AI literacies that I just shared with you from pages 1 and 2, that making sure that learning is at the center. We also have this tiered structure in place. So the initial policy is going to come from the district and then work its way down to you and your classroom. So whatever it is that the district establishes or says, then the schools within the district need to follow those guidelines, and then they might have a few others, and then that's going to trickle down to you and your classroom. And so if you feel like you're in a school that doesn't have a policy, or in a district that doesn't have a policy, you get to be the question asker. You can start asking your admin, like, what are we doing about Chat GPT and Gen AI? What is our policy going to be? Because you can establish one for now in your class if there's not one at the school or district level, but ultimately it does need to come from the district and work its way into your classroom. I talked already about avoiding outright bans or usage requirements. We're not going to just say it's all or nothing. We're going to let students choose how they want to participate, or give them the option to. So if your school district is totally blocking and banning ChatGPT and other similar websites, it's not really the best course of action. It's important to have your policy explicitly stated in your syllabus, if you can do that, and have it posted on a website for students or parents and guardians to review. And then you might use icons or a number scale to indicate a scale of use permission, so that students know how much AI can I use on this, if at all. Holly was mentioning that earlier, and it comes from the OSDE does have a guidance document for considerations on using AI in the PK-12 classroom. It is a fairly short document, about 18 pages long. That includes our citations. And within it is this acceptable use scale. And all of this is linked from the slideshow. So if you'd like that scale, we'll get to it. So then there's student expectations for AI, that they are transparent, meaning they reveal if they have used it, if they were allowed to, and that they're always going to think of Gen AI more as a collaborator who gives them feedback on their writing, who maybe provides a little structure or gives them some pointers, but is never a ghost writer. That they're not using ChatGPT to just say, write me a 3-page argumentative essay about the merits of X, Y, or Z. We want our students to follow our syllabus or contract when it comes to Gen AI, and we do want them to develop critical literacy skills, some of which are going to include some of these Gen AI literacies that we were looking at on our handouts not too long ago. So we want our students to question what AI puts out from a prompt for accuracy, check it for bias, and all those things. So on page 3 of your handy dandy handout, if you had access to a color printer, it printed off in color. I have one right here. And all of this is digital as well. So you could pull it up there. But this syllabus statement is based on one that I found that was used at the college level, and I tried to adapt it for high school. And so this is just letting students know that only certain assignments can Gen AI even be used on. Some assignments may require students to never touch Gen AI. And as a teacher, I'm going to let you know when those different contexts happen. And you can also refer your students to perhaps your school's academic integrity policy, which is maybe a good starting point for a Gen AI policy. You may just need to add a sentence or two to your school's academic integrity policy to be up to date there. And then also within this handout, there is a disclosure statement. So this lets students know how to let you know that they've used Gen AI. And so there's different components to this. This is maybe a whole lot, and it might be too in the weeds. You all are the classroom practitioners, so I'd love to hear from you later this school year on if this disclosure statement works for you and your students. It might be too much, but the guidance that I found that I thought seemed helpful was students identify which website they used, be it ChatGPT, Claude, Perplexity, Microsoft Copilot, along with its URL, the reason why they used it or how they used it, what was the prompt that they fed the LLM, and then they could describe or copy and paste the output from the tool, and then they would explain how did they use the output in their own work. So there's an example on that page 3 of the handout, and it's also here on the screen. And then if you flip to page 2 of your handout, there are further examples. Sample 1 and 2 are a little more in depth. Sample 3 lets the teacher know that no AI technologies were used on the assignment, even if they were given the leeway to do so. So this might be something you consider implementing this school year on any assignments where you do allow or encourage the use of AI. And this was interesting to me. This researcher, Elliot Hedman, on AI use in an English setting, said if we put guardrails and say, you actually have to reflect on your paper and you will get graded on this reflection, it changes the student's mindset from my job is to turn in a nice paper to my job is to reflect and think about my paper and make edits. So this is connecting to what I was saying earlier, that if we require our students to include a writer's statement at the end of their final draft, explaining what they learned from the process, what they learned from composing the paper itself, and that there's a grade for that reflection. That could be its own separate grade. It changes our students' mindset from, I just need to make an A and make a perfect paper, and maybe I want to use ChatGPT or AI to help me do that. And instead it's, I need to reflect on what I've learned, and AI can't really do that for you. I mean, you could give it a prompt and it could pretend to. But I think this is maybe the way to go. If you've ever been to like an art showcase and seen the different artist statements where they explain a little bit about how they came to create that painting, or compose a certain photograph. And it's just on a little bitty card. No, it's usually pretty small or a little square. So this is the same kind of thing, just a brief reflection. It doesn't have to be super long. But that's something, if I were still in the classroom today, I would begin implementing these writing reflections. And then a few things to hold ourselves accountable as teachers, that we need to be transparent with our students if and when we use AI. So if we're using AI in class, we need to make sure our students know that we have, and we can tell them how or why we did that, just modeling good use of it. And then if we want help figuring out feedback on a student's piece of writing, we're going to do that ourselves as the teacher. We are not going to feed our students writing into an LLM and ask for it to give us feedback, because it would do that. It would point out some things. And it might be spot on in some times, but we're only going to use that as a supplement to our own authentic teacher feedback. Otherwise, our students are going to feel less than, and that like they're not worth it, and that their writing has been consigned to a machine instead of to you, their human teacher. And so I want us to be careful of that. When we're helping our student writers, we have this role of helping them explore and create and experiment. And sometimes that might take the form of AI. With this advent of I don't want you all as teachers to feel like you're now this deep state surveillance entity where you're trying to suss out if a student used AI or not, and that it's all about discipline or punishment with students if they've used AI unethically. But we are going to run into cases, and we heard one from Holly earlier, where students are going to turn in writing that does not follow our policy, where they have used AI, and suddenly they sound overly formal in their tone, or the structure of their writing is highly advanced. They might have inaccurate quotes or made up sources or information, the hallucination we talked about earlier. And they also might have a heavy use of dashes in their writing, which for whatever reason, a lot of these LLMs were trained on writing that use dashes. And so now there's this proliferation of AI writing that uses dashes. And for those of us human writers who use dashes all along, it feels like AI is co-opting a punctuation mark that we liked. But that is kind of a sign now that someone may have used ChatGPT. And for whatever reason, the word delve is also a pretty good indication, not always, but sometimes, that an AI engine was used to create something. And then also, sometimes students will feed the AI engine a prompt and it will respond with, as a large language model, I don't really do that, but I can try. And then it proceeds to generate text. And then students who are not critical users of AI yet will just copy and paste that into writing. So if you ever see the phrase in student writing as a language model, it's a really good sign that a student did use it against your policy. So your own teacher expertise is going to give you strong spidey senses, teacher senses when a student has used AI when they shouldn't have. Please do not rely on AI detectors. There are some websites out there that will claim to tell you if a piece of writing, if there's like a 65% chance that this was AI text or not. But they can be very unreliable. They will produce false positives and they will produce false negatives. So they will incorrectly claim, oh yeah, this was AI when it wasn't. And then they'll also incorrectly claim, no, this wasn't AI and it was. So it's really best to have dialogue and conversation with your students. So here's one way to address AI misuse is asking students to expand on ideas that are already there. Can they even do that? If they can't, there's a good sign that they used AI. You could also ask them, what technologies did you use to compose? Was it just Google Docs or Microsoft Word? What else did you use? And see what they say. Sometimes just being asked, students will fold and reveal what they've done. You could also restate your classroom policy and AI use scale for the assignment. And if students do admit that they used AI against your policy, you could consider allowing them to still learn from the assignment. And you don't have to do this, but this is one approach. You could have them retry that assignment with no AI at all, especially if that's what the use scale stipulated. Or you could have them revise the assignment and now include the acknowledgement that they did use AI in that process statement. That would only be if you allowed it in the first place. So all of this is tricky. We're all kind of figuring this out. And it's taken me 50 minutes to get to let's actually see it in the classroom. So I have a book that I've read part of and plan to read all of called AI in the Writing Workshop, Finding the Right Balance. That is a pun. And one of their guidelines for how to use this for writing with AI are these 5 steps. Write, do the human writing, let the students struggle. Then they develop a prompt for the Gen AI engine of choice, LLM of choice. Then they question what the output was and decide if and how to use anything that the output created, and then to reflect and be transparent on their usage. So that should sound pretty familiar. We've been talking about that a lot. In her webinars earlier this year, my colleague, Dr. Karen Leonard, who's in charge of ed tech and micro-credentials, gave some webinars on AI in general and talked about prompt engineering. You can use this acronym, PARTS, to help you write a really good prompt for an engine or for an LLM. So you state your role, your objective, your audience, the style, tone, and other parameters you want, and then also the format or length. So if you include all of these things, there's a much greater chance that you will be happy with what you get. So it's easier to sort of see in action. So here would be some things to consider if I were to send a prompt through Claude or Chat GPT or Poe, that my aim is a particular Oklahoma academic standard. The recipients are going to be students, and I need a lesson plan for this. And I want authentic examples and application to writing during a unit about the outsiders. And so this was the prompt that I fed Claude, which is one of the LLMs. I'm a seasoned 8th grade English teacher who needs a lesson plan for 8th grade students, including English learners, about active and passive voice and misplaced and dangling modifiers in sentences. This lesson is part of a unit for the novel The Outsiders. The lesson plan should include authentic examples and application to writing, not just a worksheet. And so on the slideshow that you're going to have access to, there is a link to this lesson that is so in depth, and it's got guided practice in here. The church was set on fire by a cigarette. There's a passive. Ponyboy and Johnny rescued the children. Active. And then we've got examples of dangling modifiers and interactive practice activity on how to fix sentences, and then even sentence starters for our English learners and so on. Now, here's the deal. I've been so busy. I have not had time to investigate that lesson plan in depth. There might be hallucinations, incorrect use, or claims about what is a dangling participle or modifier or not. But it's still really interesting and fascinating that Claude created it so quickly. So as the teacher, it would be my role to then review that lesson plan for accuracy before I rolled it out in my classroom. So here's another instance of how Gen AI could perhaps help our students. We could use it for pre-writing or for structure. If you're teaching that novel in verse about the Dust Bowl, Out of the Dust by Karen Hess, you might have something like this for a research paper. Help me organize an essay about the foods that emerged during the Dust Bowl and the reasons they became popular. And so I fed this to Chat GPT, that's the icon in the top right corner, and it gave me the title, Surviving the Dust, Food Culture During the Dust Bowl Era. It gives me ideas on an introduction for this essay. It even guides me on what sort of thesis statement I could write. It doesn't give me the thesis statement, but you see it here. And then it recommends some historical context of what would bring about some of these particular foods, who these people are, the economics of the time. But then it gets into the nitty gritty or body paragraphs of Hoover stew, which is a mixture of macaroni, hot dogs, canned tomatoes, and sometimes beans. If you need a dinner idea for this week or next, make some Hoover stew. Channel your ancestors here in Oklahoma from the Dust Bowl times. It even gives reasons for why some of these ingredients were popular: cornbread and beans, uh, eggless recipes like mock apple pie, canned or foraged foods like dandelion greens or wild berries. And then other ways to use Gen AI, it can provide partial or uh, it can provide feedback on a draft of writing, whether it's just a partial draft or a complete draft. It can provide generic feedback or specific feedback. It's not always accurate. It doesn't always answer the questions, but if students are wanting feedback and there's one of you and there's 30 students in the room and 10 students need help, they could use Gen AI to get a little bit of feedback and see if it points them in the right direction. But they also need to be careful to not reveal specific names and locations in their writing. So I'm a poet. I attend a weekly open mic in Oklahoma City on a fairly regular basis called Red Dirt Poetry. And I wrote a poem recently called Taste and See. And all I said to it was, give me some revision ideas for this poem. And then I copied and pasted my full draft. And the output was, this is a tender, evocative poem that beautifully blends religious ritual with childhood longing. It's honest and layered with an undercurrent of innocence and quiet rebellion. Here are some revision ideas and suggestions that can help deepen its impact or clarify its emotional resonance. And then it gave me these 6 different ideas along with examples of what was going on in the piece and then what it could possibly look like. And then it concluded by asking me, would you like me to draft a new version of this poem incorporating all 6 of these? And just to see what the LLM would do, I said, I would like you to use ideas 2, 5, and 6. And then it churned out a new draft of my poem for me. And you know what it did? It did all 6 things anyway. So there is a human element that you always need to consider with Gen AI. You're in charge of the prompt, the machine creates this output, and then you again as the human, you are the one in control, and you decide if you like any or all of that output. Now, you could also create mentor text with Gen AI. I still highly recommend finding mentor text in the real world by published authors, mentor text from former students, and mentor text that you yourself have written. But sometimes it's interesting to see what a Gen AI could create. And that's what page 4 of your handout is. With only 3 minutes to spare, this will maybe be the last thing that we get to do today. But you can have students, you could introduce Gen AI to your students by doing an activity like this on page, it's page 5. We did get to the last page, my bad. So I like Thai food. I wanted to see, could one Gen AI LLM write a better version to a prompt than another? So the prompt was, write a descriptive and engaging paragraph about pad thai for Oklahomans who have never tried it before. And so I fed this through the websites Perplexity and Claude. And so in our final 2 or 3 minutes together, I want you to look at both paragraphs, decide which one you like better and why. And that'll be how we wrap things up today. And those of you who've eaten pad thai before are added advantage. I apologize to the rest of you if you've never had the pleasure of trying pad thai before. The rest of the slides talk about those artificial intelligence guidance documents that I pulled from to create this slide deck, including Oklahoma's own guidance document that has the AI use scale that Holly mentioned earlier. So you can download just that page from the document if you want. It'll be in this slideshow that I share here in the chat. Another thing to keep in mind is ChatGPT now receives more monthly visitors than Wikipedia. So our world is changing. If you've taught long enough, like I have, you remember kind of the wave of fear and denigration of Wikipedia for a while, and now we've all kind of said it's a good jumping off point because at least there are sources cited and you can cross-reference and double check things. But at one point, it felt like the sky was falling with Wikipedia. But now it's ChatGPT that gets even more visitors instead of Wikipedia. I've also provided links to my colleague Karen Leonard's resources for all those webinars she did on AI. And while we're sharing, I guess what I need to do, because I'm going to ask for a response in just a moment. But if you have the time, and I know we're all busy in the summer, but if you would like to provide an evaluation for our time together today, in the chat is another bit.ly link, and you'll just say the name of the session is AI, subject area is ELA, and the location was a webinar. So if you'd like to complete an evaluation of our time together, you can. And I know we've gone just a little bit over, but I appreciate you hanging in there with me. But please complete that evaluation if you're able, and then we'll wrap up with some of you sharing your answer. Did you like Perplexity or Claude's better, and why? Erica, get us started.
When I first started reading, I liked the Perplexity better because it just, the use of language was so much more descriptive. I could really immerse myself in it. But then when I got over to the Claude version and started reading past the introduction, and I went back to what the prompt said and relating it back to Oklahomans, I ended up liking the Claude version because it did a better comparison for what Oklahomans would have already experienced if they'd never eaten it.
Okay, thank you, Erica, for that response. Let's see if Gayla echoes what you said or has a different idea. Go ahead, Gayla. You'll have to unmute, upper right corner, click that microphone.
Okay, I think it did. I liked the Claude version. I thought it was more simple. I started reading Perplexity. I got confused and lost interest because of the structure of the sentence. But I liked the Claude version. I liked how it compared the barbecue flavors with the Thai flavors.
Okay, so both Erica and Gayla are in agreement, and surprise, surprise, I agree with you all as well. I felt like Claude answered the prompt better. And also it went above and beyond by giving it a title. I did not ask it to give it a title, and it did. This would also, help students kind of see, those different options. If students struggle with titles, they could present a draft into one of these LLMs and say, give me some title ideas. So there are ways to use AI responsibly and ethically, but we also have to, do that with guardrails and be careful. I think we could talk about this for another hour, but it's the summer and you've already given up an hour of it for this webinar. Thank you for your time and attention and participation. I'll hang on for a few more minutes if anyone wants to stay late. But let me put the link to the slides in the chat, and I'm also going to share them out through a follow-up email along with the recording, so you'll be able to get them that way as well. But if you want the slides right now, they're there in the chat, and I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. Let's see.